thanks for joining this session on green software engineering. So I'm Darshana. I'm the Director of Innovation at Elastic Cloud for Sustainability Studio and also an AI MVP.
Hello, hi, I'm Chris. I am Head of Open Technologies at Avanade. I'm also an AI MVP and excited to talk to you today about green software.
Perfect. We also have a few moderators with us. So we've got Richard Conway, Andy Cross from Elastic Cloud, and Fergus from Avanade, who will be helping out with any questions that we have. So we will get started.
So just a bit of housekeeping. So the session will be recorded and posted online. So if you're in the chat, if you post any questions, just so you know that you are consenting to be recorded, your name, image, etc. could be part of the recording for future use. If you don't want to be recorded, you can leave the session, although this particular one won't be recorded for later. Although it does look like it's being recorded. So yeah, feel free to post in chat. There'll be people in the room as well. So that said, any questions, raise your hand if you're here on Teams, post it in the chat and our moderator will pop it up. Otherwise, we'll get started. So yeah, Darshana, how did you get started with green software?
It's actually quite interesting. So I started back in 2018 building products in sustainability, initially starting in the renewable space, looking at how we can predict solar radiance for solar farms. For the last year or so, been focusing more on building ESG products. And I guess as kind of more awareness has come about and you kind of immerse yourself further and further into sustainability, you start looking at it from all different types of angles. And for us, I was kind of saying, okay, well, we're building these products in sustainability that other people are using, but let's take a look at ourselves, what we're doing. Is our code base energy efficient? Are we using efficient programming languages? Is our architecture up to scratch? Are there improvements that can be made? So that's kind of how I got started into green tech. How about you, Chris?
Very similar path, actually. So I was focused a lot on IoT and blockchain, looking at circular economy and how we incentivize recycling. And the more I looked into it, the more I kind of realized that our software had an incredibly high electricity and carbon footprint. And a year ago, the Green Software Foundation was announced at Build just last year. Got deeply involved in trying to create the standards for that.
Okay, great. So let's just kick off with a few kind of areas of conversation, and then
Sure.
If you guys have any questions, feel free to throw them our way. So how would you kind of describe what green software engineering is?
So to me, green software engineering is the intersection of traditional green software practices, so testing, CI/CD, DevOps, but applying that with a sustainable lens. So starting to think about not just instrumenting your code for observability generally, but also what's the CPU profile, the GPU profile, how does that translate to electricity? And we can use that as a proxy for carbon. So trying to let developers know that the software you write can have a real impact on the environment. How about you? What does green software engineering mean to you?
I guess that was a really comprehensive answer. I guess for me, it's probably just quite simply being able to have the same outcomes and functionality from software, but in a more energy efficient way. So whether that is kind of writing code more efficiently or designing your architectures more efficiently, so we can essentially still have the powerful impact that technology can have within the world as a whole and within climate change and sustainability, but in a way that is responsible, I guess.
I like that. It's quite short and snappy.
Yeah. Okay, so when we talk about green tech, what kind of other areas do we see kind of it affecting?
So green tech is an interesting one because I do think people tend to look at carbon and carbon optimization initially, and obviously that's what I was talking about. But I think you need to look at the whole supply chain. So where is the carbon, the pollution, the e-waste in your life cycle, and also what other impacts and knock-on effects can you actually have?
Yeah.
What have you been working on?
I think it's quite interesting because from more of a business perspective, when we're building these solutions, I guess it's a common kind of thread that will occur in a lot of conversations when we're thinking around, okay, do we have budget for this? Is it cost effective? Can we make it secure? Are there any risks associated with that? And I think bringing like the green tech kind of thinking along those lines and making it more of the norm is a really important aspect as well to bring into the conversation. Rather than it kind of being an afterthought, it should be thought about through every step of the kind of development lifecycle, just as cost and security are.
So you talk about every step of the development lifecycle there, and I know certainly we've been looking at how do we train our developers, our designers, and our technical architects to think about efficiency and sustainability throughout their development. Have you seen that really taking off for the people that you're speaking to? Have you seen any good training courses?
Yeah, that's a really, really cool kind of point of interest. I think one of the things that I really like about green tech specifically, it's not so much coming from the top down, it's not being enforced. There is a real sense of empowerment within the tech community where people are feeling like they want to kind of contribute to influencing change. So they're thinking about this actively. There are a lot of kind of open source tools around trying to track kind of your software carbon intensity. There are loads of cloud open source tools that look at architecture. I know Microsoft have their emissions impact dashboard, which allow you to look at all of those things. I think one thing I would probably like to see a little bit more of is tools that don't just allow us to measure and report where we are. I think that's an important aspect because we kind of need some sort of consistency across technology industry. But just going one step further, so one of the conversations I was recently part of, they were talking about carbon aware load balancers. So it may be redundant to some point. I think it's a very complex issue because then we need to think about networks, bandwidth, latency, how much data is being transferred, and also data centers are becoming more and more 100% renewable energy. But in terms of the carbon aware load balancers, what is quite interesting is moving workloads so that they're in regions that are of lower carbon intensity. And if we can build tools that kind of manage that in a more automated way, I think that kind of reduces the burden on tech developers and technology teams so that they can become a bit more kind of focusing on the innovation, I guess.
That's a really interesting point. So if I think about some of the points you raised there, so load balancing, you've got region shifting, but you also have time shifting, so moving your workloads to certain times of the day where the renewable energy sources might be cleaner. In the UK, for example, the energy at 3, 4 a.m. is much cleaner than it is at, say, right now.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of open source projects looking at that. So there's the Carbon Aware Software Development Kit from the Green Software Foundation, Cloud Native Computing Foundation, and DAPO was just donated by Microsoft to that and powers Azure Container Apps, also has the ability to shift workloads depending on other inputs. I could see how you could stitch those together. So you've got your tool here saying your energy is green or this region's green. You've got a tool here that allows you to shift your workloads, kind of tying the two together. But it's all quite manual at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I'd love to get your opinion on that. Like, what do you think? I think this is a kind of a similar theme that runs through sustainability, whether we're talking about green tech or ESG frameworks. There's just a lot of tools and everybody is trying to contribute to developing great solutions, which is a great thing to see. But at some point, there needs to be convergence and standardization. I'm a little bit more optimistic for that to come sooner rather than later within the tech community. But do you see kind of your work within the Green Software Foundation, is that convergence starting to occur, or are we a little way off still?
It's starting. If you think about other conversations around IoT standardization, which I think are in a similar nascent phase with DTDL, competing standards, right now you've got the Green Software Foundation, Linux Foundation project, co-founded by Microsoft, GitHub and others, and that's been working on standards for software carbon intensity, as you mentioned. The Cloud Native Computing Foundation has now launched their sustainability group. You've got the Digital Public Goods Alliance, you've got a UK strategy, you've got the Chartered Institute for IT, lots and lots of groups springing up now. So I'm optimistic the standards are on the way. What worries me is that none of these groups seem to be working in tandem or lockstep. And the most recent conversations I've heard have been actually, how can we actually work together and stop reinventing the wheel?
Yeah, yeah, that's a really important area.
We have a question from Paul, who wants to know, are all the mentioned tools found on the Green Software Foundation's repo?
Yes, so the Green Software Foundation can be found on greensoftware.foundation and on GitHub. The Carbon Aware Software Development Kit is one tool, and that allows you to instrument your code. There's another tool, which is the Carbon Aware CI/CD pipeline, which lets you measure the carbon in your infrastructure as code, so Pulumi, Terraform, ARM, Bicep. There is also an aim for that to include static code analysis, but that is kind of just future. So any help from anyone in the room or anyone online would be really appreciated too. Cool, cheers.
Yeah, I was actually checking out the Green Software Foundation repos the other day, and one thing that I really liked is I know it's the alpha version, but the really simple calculation for software carbon intensity. It's quite simple. Anybody could probably look at it. It's got about 4 inputs, and it kind of strips away a lot of the complexity. So everybody can really have a quick metric to look at to say, okay, this is my benchmark. And then we can have a discussion around, okay, well, how did we get there? How can we improve? And I think it really drives the conversation forward, which is great to see.
Yeah, I like it because it makes your carbon measurements comparable. So a lot of organizations measure in different ways. So Google might talk about their particular services, other companies are talking about theirs, but they don't measure carbon in the same way. So by making your calculation available, explaining how we expect you to measure the energy in your current location, your marginal emissions, the embodied carbon in your servers, how do you time slice it, and giving a way for people through a simple JSON format to actually publish that benchmark as well. We're hoping that will drive people to report their current score so that through competition we can slowly drive down carbon. But it is early days, and actually there's a lot of arguments going on the GitHub about how do we update this for COP27. And again, having people try out this standard would be really great.
Yeah, I think that's the key step, right? Is okay, let's get a few use cases now. It's one thing I've definitely encouraged within our team. It's like, okay, if we want to have active conversations around how do we improve, we need to start using these kind of really simple metrics so that we can benchmark ourselves and move forward, essentially.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked a lot around kind of changes that we can make in terms of architecture, in terms of code. I think, well, just focusing a little bit more, I guess, on Microsoft's green software principles, a lot of them tend to be kind of, I guess, low-hanging fruit, which is a great first step. It's focusing on a lot of kind of architectural changes. So can we move away from always on demand resources? Can we use less data that is redundant? Can we remove it from storage? So we're kind of reducing our impact from that way. What do you kind of see as the next steps, kind of going a little bit deeper, I guess?
Well, one of those that you mentioned in an earlier part of the conversation was networking. And actually, I think that one's often overlooked because every time you send data outside of your cloud where your networking paths are more tightly controlled, you actually don't know what the energy mix of all those different network hops are. So that's the first thing I would say. After the low-hanging fruit of your cloud infrastructure, what bundles are you serving up to a user? The obvious ones like compressing your JavaScript, but reducing custom fonts, compressing images. You'd be surprised at how much of an impact that actually has on the carbon of a web application. But I think the most difficult pieces are going to be actually instrumenting your code to measure functions, methods, giving developers real-time feedback on this line of code I added, these few lines, has this made my carbon worse? Has it cleaned it up? Right now, that's pretty opaque.
Yeah.
I mean, do you see the same in machine learning at the moment?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I think that is like kind of when we go back to that superficial layer, once we start going into the depths of like kind of pushing change beyond architecture, we kind of see like how broad technology is. There are many different types of technologists, whether you're a data engineer, a BI engineer, a data scientist, a web developer, etc. And all of those kind of different roles are going to have different decisions to make. So you kind of touched on web design. They'll talk about, do we have light mode or dark mode? Are we going to have autoplay on our videos? Coming from a data science background myself, I think, are looking at slightly different things, which kind of look at, okay, well, data is usually the fundamental question. Do we have enough data to start building a model? And sometimes with business kind of pressures, we can overlook if the quality is good enough. And I think spending the time to just kind of take that extra step of assessment, put a bit more time in your exploratory data analysis and your statistics, understand if the data is of good enough quality so we're not relying on those really heavy compute intensive algorithms to do the heavy lifting for us, to pick out those nuances in the patterns and correlations. So I think that's kind of the first step. And then it's just capturing specific data that can help us to kind of move forward. So how many experiments are we going to run? what is the hardware that we're going to use, how are we going to productionize this. They're all the types of questions that we would want to kind of consider. There's a really great study, actually, I think it's from a Microsoft blog, that looks at the training of an NLP model, GPT-3, in different Azure regions, which is quite interesting because there's a tenfold difference between, I think, South Africa, which is around 900 kilograms of carbon emitted, versus France, which has about 90,000 kilograms. So that's quite a significant difference. So I think there are definitely things that we want to start exploring. I think also there's a lot of kind of cultural change that needs to be endorsed, right? So even if we think about Kaggle competitions, everyone's always chasing that 1% increase in performance. And it's like, okay, well, performance doesn't just include model performance. We need to think about what is the green impact? Is this the most energy efficient model that we can produce?
That can be crazy. That 1%, I was reading a study about the IRIS data classification data set, that the final tuning for 0.2% of accuracy used 2,000% more energy than the initial training of the model just to get that increase in accuracy.
Yeah.
So it can be slightly crazy. And I think just to put it in context, I see some people looking really enthralled in the room, some people looking a bit puzzled. This isn't just abstract, by the way. The impact of moving your software to the cloud, of greening it, can be incredible. So one business department moving to green code, we saw have a 49% reduction in carbon, which is like 121,000 metric tons removed or avoided, which is like 26,000 cars. So if you can, in your organization, green your software, you can have the impact of removing 26,000 cars from the road in your decision as a technical architect, a developer, a data scientist. And I think I find that a bit mind-blowing.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. That's pretty impressive. Yeah, so it just shows that I guess we can kind of have an influence on change if we put our minds to it. Okay. So we've kind of talked about, okay.
So I was just going to say, we've got a question from Teams.
Yeah.
The question is, when did software engineering, especially with the cloud and data centers, do you think start having an impact on the environment compared to, a time where everybody was doing everything locally?
Yeah, I think generally the kind of advice is moving to the cloud is more sustainable, predominantly because they have kind of customized hardware that is more optimized. They have, well, data centers generally have better recycling schemes of heating and cooling, just generally more energy efficient as they rely more on renewables. So that's kind of the first point. I think the second point is there is always the flip side to that as well, right? So I think technology as a whole accounts for 1% of global electricity demand at the moment, which is on par with the aviation industry. And I think there are some studies, there was a Nature paper that I was reading that predicts that will go up to 8%. So it's not an insignificant amount. Yes, moving to the cloud is more sustainable generally, but that doesn't come without its caveats. And I think that's when it becomes a shared responsibility. We can't just rely on cloud providers to do all of the heavy lifting. We need to kind of think as developers, as you mentioned, some of the really phenomenal results you can get from just putting in the extra effort to refine your code, refine your architectures. And that will be quite broad and varied. I touched on some of the data science points, but I mean, you might have some more examples on different roles of tech within.
Yeah, there's tons. And I think the carbon and green optimization for the cloud almost directly ties in with cost optimization, because as you reduce and you right-size your infrastructure, so not using virtual machines, using app services, Azure functions, containers, those are cheaper than running kind of a whole VM for a small workload. So almost as a business case for optimize the infrastructure you're using and optimize your carbon and reduce them linearly. But yeah, the green principles from Microsoft in their sustainability track or at principles.green are also very good. And I'm going to have a shameless plug here to another Green Software Foundation project, the Principles of Green Software. If anyone wants to review those, critique those, improve those, put a pull request in.
Yeah, amazing.
Got a question here.
Does it directly correlate? So on-demand computing, run your function or containerize it so you only get charged for exactly what you use, which is like a classic sales feature of cloud. Does it completely correlate that if you reduce your cost, you will naturally reduce your carbon? Or will you need to, can you see a future where there's a third charging element, which isn't just time and power, but it's also carbon?
So I'll repeat that question. The question was, and correct me if I misget your question.
It was a ramble. So
yeah. Effectively, does the correlation between downsizing your infrastructure, so moving to serverless functions, compute on demand, does that cost reduction correlate to a carbon reduction?
Yeah. So if you redeploy your application and you save money, will you naturally save carbon? And if not, do you see a time when there's a third metric?
So if you redeploy your application and you save cost, will you also save carbon? Right now, yes, there's almost a linear correlation between the two. I would be surprised if there was an additional metric for carbon in the future, because so many organizations are moving to renewables, to carbon removal. And I think adding an additional metric to measure would actually make that more difficult for the cloud providers and more difficult for actual end users to optimize their software. We want this to be as easy as possible.
With no value as well.
Yeah.
You've already got that natural linear correlation. Why would you?
Yeah, and the point.
Someone cheat the system.
Yeah.
Save money and hose carbon down.
And the point that was made there was that there wouldn't be much value if people were incentivized in some way to game the system. I think the only other point I would make to that is that I think we will see cloud providers making more and more carbon data available.
Yeah.
Cool. Yep, the question in the room.
So earlier you said South Africa was more carbon efficient than France.
The other way around.
Okay.
Yeah.
And does Microsoft make that available now? Because that's the other lever I can pull. We can reduce costs by re-architecting. We can just move something to another region.
So just to repeat the question for Darshna, does Microsoft make the energy efficiency of those different regions available? There was an example earlier about France being more energy efficient than South Africa.
Yeah, so there are, I think you can get average types of information about specific data centers. One talk that I previously watched was talking about the average carbon intensity of the particular data center. The specific intrinsics are not, I don't think, openly available, but through, so Microsoft have a carbon emissions impact dashboard. And if you have resources in different regions, you're able to see the carbon impact of that. So yeah, you could make data-driven decisions based on that information.
And I'm going to put another shameless plug out here for another Green Software Foundation project. Apologies. There is a new project which takes in data from all of the Azure data centers around the world and shows you online in a map what their current marginal carbon emissions are, i.e. how clean are they? And these providers like WattTime, electricity map, as well as data from Microsoft themselves to make those decisions. So you can make some API-driven decisions to make that information usable now. So that project, I think it's just data center map on the GitHub repo, and it uses data from the Carbon-Aware software development kit and the Carbon CI/CD pipeline. These are very well named. Cool. There's a question just there.
Yeah, you talked a little bit about the impact that AI has on sustainability by training models and using these compute-intensive algorithms. Is there things that the results of those compute-intensive algorithms can be actually helping towards sustainability, so kind of flipping that on its head?
Sorry, could you just repeat the last part of that question?
Sure. So like, what can we do with AI to improve sustainability in this area? Okay,
I see. So yeah, that's a great question. I think we've been talking about a lot of the negatives, well, the flip side of the coin, in terms of technology development has a massive AI, carbon impact, but obviously it has the kind of scope and opportunity to have a lot of good as well. Just to name a few that I've looked into in terms of kind of our understanding of climate risk, if we look at the kind of impact reports that the IPCC put out, the development of those kind of models that went into understanding our impact on the environment were usually done very linearly. And with the kind of advancements in technology, AI algorithms, we've been able to do that in a much more parallel process. That's allowed us to have kind of a realistic timeline. So instead of 10 years, we're looking at kind of yearly kind of updates now, which is a great thing for us to kind of allocate capital in the right way, make sure that we're developing new innovative kind of tools. Renewables infrastructure. So I mentioned I started out in renewables predicting solar irradiance, but we can kind of understand weather patterns, where's the best place to build the next solar farm. In a similar vein, kind of with electrical vehicle infrastructure, if we understand charging patterns, we can expand the electrical vehicle charging infrastructure. Just to name a few others, I know we spoke about IoT. So IoT is a great one. We're kind of moving to a hybrid world, and we want to kind of encourage freedoms of our workforce, but at the same time we want to do that in a responsible way. So if we can use IoT sensors and build those smart kind of AI algorithms on the top of it to manage that in a much more energy efficient way, so we're not heating, cooling, lighting rooms unnecessarily, that will have a huge impact. There's also supply chains, agriculture. So we typically kind of repurpose land for agriculture and then repetitively grow the same type of crop, stripping the soil of nutrients. If we can use AI algorithms to understand growing patterns, we can become less reliant on fertilizers and pesticides and rotate that kind of crop growing kind of practice in a much more energy efficient way.
Yeah, I think using data is just going to be important in general. So
Yeah.
It's not a green software example per se, but I think it's relevant. I went to an office midway through the pandemic, and I was telling you earlier, the toilet roll delivery had not stopped. So we had an office with meeting rooms full of toilet roll, which is firstly not sustainable. We donated it to local charities, and this was when there was no toilet roll in the UK as well, so it wasn't a very good look. But things like Microsoft Cloud for Sustainability, looking at business processes and trying to figure out those small optimizations, I think the bottom-up green software engineering approaches and the top-down business models, filling that chasm in the middle is going to be really important.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so there's a lot of scope for application of AI within sustainability as well.
So we have a few more questions. Joris points out on one of the previous points that that it's one of the reasons of NPUs, neural processing units, that are getting traction is because of all of these things. So just by extension, how do you see that the impact of the Green Software Foundation and other bodies can actually impact hardware design to make chipsets more efficient?
So I'll start on that one. So there's a couple of projects that are not Green Software Foundation projects. The first one is the Open Compute project, another Linux Foundation project. That's making standardized data center patterns available to make it easier for people to swap in components, make recycling easier, reduce e-waste, and extend the lifespan of servers. So that's one. And there's another couple of initiatives that Open UK has a similar project to try and make a sustainable data center design pattern. So I think it's about sharing information for the common good that's at the moment locked up in a lot of people's heads and in organizations.
Okay. Well, the questions are coming in thick and fast right at the end.
Okay. We've got a few minutes left, so we'll try and get to as many as we can. 2 minutes.
Okay, so Chad asks, have Microsoft got agreements to reduce power consumption and to make the data centers that they own more green?
So I don't work for Microsoft, but publicly on their website, they do have those commitments.
Yeah, likewise.
And Rashid wants to know, are there any laws in any country which enforce environment respecting measures on cloud providers?
There are, so in the Nordics in particular, there are requirements, first of all, for the purchase and procurement of services and for the service providers that companies engage. And I think many other countries have similar.
Yeah, I think in the US, the SEC have kind of, for public companies and government agencies as well, are kind of mandating that there are disclosures around how your activities are impacting climate.
And the Global Reporting Initiative is going to make that an accountancy requirement as well. Okay.
Time for one final question?
Yep, one final question.
Okay, there's one final question from Teams. If you both had to suggest one action a mainly cloud-hosted business can take today to reduce environmental impact and start on their journey, what would that one thing be?
For me, it would be go on principles.green and then learn the software carbon intensity standard and give us some feedback.
Yeah, I would probably pick a similar kind of answer, is focus on that low-hanging fruit, right? I mean, you gave a great example of how we can reduce the carbon impact straight away by just making simple architectural choices. So I think I'd focus on that.
Cool. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for coming. I will be around a bit after. Cheers.